Hi everyone, I'd like to introduce you to the project I've been working on this semester. I live in a rural area where the traditional fixed line internet connectivity options like cable and DSL aren't that great. The fastest connection in that category that's available to me only runs at about 10 megabits per second down and 1 megabit per second up, which is not so great for working from home. A few months ago, I spoke with a coworker who also lives in a rural area. Actually, he just recently moved to one. And what he found was that he was actually able to get a much faster internet connection by connecting to the local Sprint, or excuse me, to connecting to the local T-Mobile tower than he was able to get through any kind of fixed line connection like DSL. Um, that inspired me to look into my options, and it turned out that I actually am able to obtain a much faster and less expensive connection by connecting to, in my case, a local AT&T tower to get my internet access. Um, that worked so well for me that I decided that I'd like to, for this class project, create a guide to help others go through that same process and have fewer technical hurdles than what I faced. So the website that I created is hosted at byobroadband.com. I've got the current version up on my screen right now. And the main part of the site takes visitors through a four-step process to determine if doing this sort of thing is right for them, and if so, they'll guide them through it. Those four steps are to check your coverage. So that includes looking at the official coverage maps, picking a mobile network and data plan. Which in step one, you may have, for example, decided I want to go with Verizon, for example. But you still, even after you know which network you want to be on, there's still the questions of which reseller are you going to be on, or are you going to buy directly, which data plan are you going to use, etc. Next, this guides the visitor through selecting the right hardware. That could be as simple as using their existing cell phone, or could be more complex. For example, one of the configurations I'll show you in this video is installing a router inside my house and then mounting two exterior antennas. And of course, there's lots of variations in between those two extremes. And finally, after the hardware is selected, this site guides the visitor through installing the hardware, and that includes troubleshooting tips. So I applied these four steps to three example configurations. The first and the most complex one is the configuration I used to replace DSL at my home. So this documents the process I went through to set up that new connection. Gives some background information on the DSL connection I had previously. Talks about the research that I performed, including running a topological map and looking at how signal propagation is likely to be. Talks about a prototype that I set up. I didn't want to invest any more than I had to before I knew if this would actually work. So one of the first things I did was buy the minimum amount of hardware I needed to, in theory, get a connection. And fortunately, that minimal configuration shown in the current photo performed way better than I thought it would. The download speed was marginally faster than what I had with DSL, but more importantly, the upload speed was about 12 times as fast as what I had with DSL, and upload speed was really the pain point previously, so that was a nice boost. And as I iterated on this project and ended up with the file configuration, the performance figures improved somewhat. Also, in this example, discuss the different antenna configurations I tried. What I ended up with was a 2-antenna configuration. One of the neat things about 4G LTE is it will actually improve performance as you add antennas, because it can actually transmit and receive on multiple antennas at the same time. So I discussed those details. This is the final antenna configuration, the router that I'm using, and attaching to the antennas. And then I get into the economics of the switch, discuss the hardware that I purchased, and so there was some upfront expense here, but it actually saved my recurrent expenses. So I'll basically make back what I put into this in 9 months with with savings on the recurrent fees. The other two configurations are much more simple. The second example shows tethering to a cell phone, and this is my backup internet connection in case the AT&T connection goes down. And it's basically just tethering my cell phone to a router, which has a built-in access point, so that way I can place the cell phone where I get the best signal, and then the access point has a better range than the cell phone's built-in Wi-Fi transmitter does, so that can cover the whole house. The last example configuration is kind of a midway point where I'm using a dedicated device to connect to a network, in this case Sprint's, but it is 100% indoors. So I have a hotspot and an indoor antenna, and that combination provides kind of a midway point between the outdoor installation I started with and the backup internet connection, where it's significantly cheaper and simpler to set up than the outdoor installation is, but also a lot faster than just tethering to a cell phone. So those are the three example configurations that I set up, and those were done in part to validate the methodology that the rest of the site uses, those 4 steps that I guide users through. And those 4 steps were refined as I set up each of those internet connections. So if we go to the check coverage page, that walks the users through things like viewing the official coverage maps, considering what kind of speed they need, costs. It also shows them how to use a cell phone to measure signal strength and speed test the network before they commit to purchasing the hardware that might be required to get a good connection at their location. I also discuss some of the technical jargon that they may run into and might not be familiar with yet. The pick a data plan page, the pick a data plan section, I broke down into a discussion of both smartphone data plans that allow tethering and data plans that are designed for dedicated devices like hotspots and routers. The hardware selection page is the most involved page because there's lots of variables there to deal with. What I did to try to make a complex process less complex, I hesitate to say simple, but let's say less complex, is to break that down into 5 substeps, where the visitor picks a radio. That could be a cell phone, a hotspot, etc. Then they select an antenna configuration, decide if they want to use an amplifier. The short form of that is that amplifiers won't help most people, but for those on the fringes, it might help them. Add in lightning protection if any component of this is outside. And then after all these other variables are figured out, add in the cabling that's needed to interconnect everything. There's also a discussion on the importance of antenna elevation and how to decide how much elevation you need. In some cases, that's as simple as just put the antenna on the top floor of your house, but if that's not good enough, then this goes back to the topological map that I showed earlier. It discusses how to create your own to see how much antenna elevation will impact your configuration. And then finally, there's a hardware installation guide that takes that hardware that was selected in the previous section and provides advice on how to install it, including a discussion on what to do yourself versus hire a professional to do, how to aim your antenna, how to mount it, waterproofing, and details like that. So that's the site. I look forward to hearing any feedback you have. Thanks.